China may see a prolonged crisis in the Strait of Hormuz not simply as an economic shock, but as a strategic opportunity. Even though China is a major buyer of Iranian oil and would feel real pain from higher energy prices, shipping disruption, and tighter supply chains, Beijing may still calculate that the long-term geopolitical gains could outweigh the short-term cost. In this view, the crisis is not only about oil, it is about power, influence, and the future shape of the international order. Even with the short-term pain, Beijing may still see five significant strategic advantages in a prolonged Hormuz crisis. First, preventing American strategic control. One reason China could benefit from a Hormuz crisis is that it may prevent the United States from reinforcing its role as the global guardian of key energy choke points. If Washington were able to reopen the strait by force and with broad international legitimacy, it would send a powerful message that the United States still decides who secures access to one of the world's most important energy routes. For China, that would deepen a long-standing strategic concern often described as the Malacca dilemma. That is, the fear of dependence on maritime trade routes that could be influenced or controlled by rival powers in a crisis. By resisting or blocking Western-led resolutions that could legitimize U.S. military action, China may be trying to limit Washington's ability to strengthen its strategic authority in the region. Second, weakening the petrodollar system. A crisis in the Strait of Hormuz could also create pressure on the broader dollar-based energy system. Because the global oil trade has long been tied to the US dollar, and stability in the Gulf can encourage countries to think more seriously about alternatives. China has spent years building those alternatives, not to replace the dollar overnight, but to reduce dependence on it over time. These efforts include yuan-based oil trading mechanisms, cross-border payment systems linked to Chinese-led economic networks, and deeper energy integration with countries such as Russia and Iran. From Beijing's perspective, a Hormuz crisis could accelerate doubts about a system centered too heavily on the dollar and on US-controlled financial power. Third, using its long-term resilience. China may also believe it is better prepared than many of its rivals to absorb the shock of a prolonged disruption. Over the years, Beijing has built a number of strategic buffers designed not just for efficiency but for resilience. These include large strategic petroleum reserves built up over time, infrastructure projects such as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which expand access to the Arabian Sea, overland energy routes through Russia and Central Asia, and major domestic expansion in solar, wind, and nuclear energy. These measures do not make China immune to a Hormuz crisis, but they may give Beijing more room to maneuver than other major import-dependent economies such as Japan, South Korea, or parts of Europe. Fourth, gaining narrative and political influence. China may also see political opportunity in the way the crisis is interpreted globally. By opposing Western-led intervention and presenting itself as a defender of sovereignty and restraint, Beijing can strengthen its image in parts of the global South, where skepticism of Western military action remains high. This narrative matters because international crises are not fought only through weapons and markets. They are also fought through legitimacy, perception, and diplomacy. If China is seen as the side calling for restraint, while the United States is seen as using force to preserve its dominance, Beijing may gain trust and political space in regions that will play an important role in shaping the future international order. Fifth, turning time into an advantage. Finally, China may believe that time itself could work in its favor. A prolonged Hormuz crisis would impose real costs on everyone, but Beijing may calculate that the United States would face a different kind of pressure: military strain, political fatigue, alliance management, and rising domestic frustration. In that sense, China may not need to win the crisis directly. It may only need the crisis to drag on long enough for the cost to accumulate more heavily on the American side. From this perspective, the crisis becomes a test of endurance, and Beijing may believe that in a long geopolitical contest, relative advantage matters more than short-term pain. So, to conclude, the argument is not that a Strait of Hormuz crisis would be painless for China. It would not. The argument is that Beijing may still see strategic upside if the crisis weakens American authority, pushes more countries to question the dollar based energy system, rewards resilience, strengthens China's political narrative, and turns time into a geopolitical advantage. In other words, China does not need a Hormuz crisis to be good for China. It only needs the crisis to weaken the system that has favored the United States for decades. So the deeper question is not simply who suffers first, but who comes out of the crisis with a stronger position in the global order. Thank you for staying with the analysis. If you value strategic clarity over noise, subscribe to the channel for the next perspective.